Welcome to the podcast, To Preserve, Protect, and Defend the Soul of America, the topic we shall discuss in today's show. The companionship economy, humanization, loneliness, and the American pet industry. I am your host, Alex.
And I am your co-host, Sam.
We are jumping right into something today that, I guarantee touches your life in some way, either directly or through someone you know.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. So I want to start by just dropping a number right in the center of the room. A massive stop you in your tracks kind of number.
Lay it on us.
In 2023, American households spent $147 billion on their pets.
That is just wow.
And by 2025, that number is estimated to hit $158 billion. Let's really pause and unpack what $147 billion actually looks like.
Yeah, we need some context for that.
To put it into perspective for you, that is more than the entire gross domestic product of Hungary.
Unbelievable.
Or Morocco, or even Ecuador.
It's a staggering figure. And, it's growing at a rate that defies almost every other sector of the retail economy.
It really defies logic when you first hear it. Think about this. If you took the combined annual revenues of the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL.
Like literally all of America's major sports obsessions.
Exactly. The massive stadiums, the television deals, the merchandising, all of it combined. They do not equal what is being spent on dogs, cats, and companion animals.
That is wild to think about.
So our mission today is to figure out the underlying why. What does that colossal mountain of money actually represent?
Right, because it's not just a fun piece of trivia about a pet-loving nation.
No, not at all. It operates as a highly complex social document.
It absolutely is a social document. When you start, pulling apart that $107 billion, you aren't just looking at bags of kibble and chew toys.
Right. What are we actually looking at?
You are looking at a mirror reflecting structural loneliness.
Right.
You are looking at the direct consequences of how we have designed our cities and suburbs over the last 70 years.
Wow, yeah.
And you are looking at deeply ingrained, uniquely American philosophies about healthcare and risk.
And perhaps most profoundly,
You are seeing how a highly optimized market economy is incredibly adept at finding, isolating, and monetizing our deepest, most unspoken emotional needs.
which brings to mind a subtitle from some of the material we are analyzing today. I think it perfectly captures the sheer sprawling breadth of what we need to cover.
Oh yeah, go ahead and read that.
It reads, On dogs, social capital, actuarial innovation, guilt, genetics, and what we're really buying when we buy for our animals.
That is quite the intense itinerary.
It is. So to really understand what we are buying today, we have to rewind the clock. We have to go way, way back.
Right, into deep history.
Because if you look at the broad sweep of human history, the way we treat animals right now is a massive, glaring anomaly.
It is a total departure from the historical baseline. To ground this, we really have to look at the domestication of the dog.
Which is arguably one of the oldest interspecies relationships, right?
Absolutely. It's one of the most consequential relationships in human history. The current genetic and archaeological evidence places that domestication somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago.
That is a huge time span. Where did it happen?
Well, evolutionary biologists and archaeologists heavily debate the precise location. There's evidence pointing to East Asia, to Europe, to the Middle East.
So it could have been anywhere, really.
Yeah, and some very compelling theories suggest multiple simultaneous domestication sites across the globe.
Yeah.
But what is absolutely not debated in the scientific community is the fundamental nature of that early relationship.
Which was what?
It was a working, functional partnership.
It was a survival pact, essentially. These early dogs, which were essentially domesticated wolves, were hunting alongside humans.
Right, they were earning their keep.
They were serving as an early warning system, barking when predators or rival groups approached a camp at night. Later on, they were herding early livestock and even playing roles in warfare.
It was a highly transactional mutualism.
Exactly. The humans provided a steady source of food, like the scraps from the hunt and the warmth of the fire.
And in return, the dogs provided labor, sensory advantages, and a living alarm system.
It definitely wasn't about cuddling on a couch. But wait, what about cats? Their timeline is a bit different, right?
Yes, the timeline for cats is roughly 10,000 years ago, and heavily centered around the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East.
And how did that happen?
Well, their domestication process is fascinating because it was almost certainly self-initiated.
Oh, they chose us.
Basically, yes. As human beings transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural societies, they started storing grain.
And grain attracts mice?
Huge stores of grain inevitably attracted massive populations of rodents, and the rodents, in turn, attracted wildcats.
That makes perfect sense.
The cats found human proximity incredibly agreeable because it offered an endless buffet of mice. And humans were absolutely thrilled to have this highly efficient, self-sustaining pest control system.
Right. So by the time you get to ancient Egypt, cats are elevated to a sacred status and being mummified, but the origin of that relationship was entirely practically functional.
Exactly. It was a utility arrangement first.
I think this is a crucial distinction to make for you, the listener, because we tend to project our modern feelings backward onto history.
We really do. We assume it was always like this.
But for the vast, overwhelming majority of recorded history, love for animals was inextricably tied to their utility. Let's think about a Roman farmer.
Okay, a Roman farmer.
That farmer might have genuinely loved his ox. He might have treated it well, spoken to it kindly, and felt real grief when it died.
Sure.
But he loved that ox because it pulled the plow that allowed his family to eat. The affection was real, but it was firmly embedded in the utility of the animal.
Precisely. The affection was a byproduct of the function.
Right.
If a medieval noblewoman loved her hunting falcon, it was partially because that falcon was an apex predator that brought back game for the table.
And partially because it was a status symbol, I imagine.
Yes, a status symbol of her landowning class. The affection wasn't separated from the labor or the social utility.
Wow.
What we see today, this purely companionate animal keeping, where the animal provides zero material labor, is a completely different paradigm.
Okay, I have to push back a little here, because when you walk through a museum and look at Renaissance paintings, you see aristocrats, kings, and queens with these tiny, perfectly groomed lapdogs sitting on their laps.
That's true.
Those dogs clearly aren't hunting anything bigger than a piece of dropped cheese. So haven't the ultra-rich always had pure companion animals?
That is a very fair point, and it's a necessary nuance. Yes, aristocrats absolutely did keep ornamental pets.
Okay.
You see lapdogs in the Roman courts. You see small, flat-faced dogs bred specifically for the Chinese imperial court, like the Pekingese. And you see European royals keeping exotic birds and toy spaniels.
Right.
But what makes the modern era entirely unique is not the capacity for pure companionship, but the generalization of it.
What do you mean by generalization?
Well, for thousands of years, keeping a totally unproductive animal that you had to feed with your own resources was a luxury reserved for a tiny fraction of a percent of the population.
Because most people were just trying to survive.
Exactly. It was a display of exorbitant wealth to say, look, I have so much excess food, I can feed a dog that does absolutely no work.
Wow, okay.
What changes in the modern era is that this aristocratic luxury became a standard expected feature of the broad urban middle class.
So how did we get from a world where only kings had lapdogs to a world where middle-class families are buying their golden retrievers orthopedically supportive memory foam beds?
It's a huge leap.
The great catalyst for this shift, as the historical data shows, was industrialization, specifically the Victorian era in the 19th century.
Right, the Industrial Revolution changes everything.
Think about what industrialization actually does to daily life for you. It separates the majority of people from direct agricultural labor.
You move from the farm to the factory.
Exactly. When you no longer need a chicken in your yard to provide eggs or meat to survive, a chicken can conceptually become a pet.
That is a fascinating way to look at it.
When you no longer need a horse to pull your wagon to work because you have a train or a streetcar, the horse transitions into a leisure partner.
Exactly. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change the economy. It fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of society.
How so?
Well, the emerging Victorian middle class was experiencing this massive, disruptive, often brutal capitalist society. Cities were becoming polluted, crowded, and fiercely competitive.
Right, Charles Dickens kind of stuff.
Exactly. In the midst of all this, the Victorian middle class developed a deep anxiety about their own moral standing.
Interesting.
They were worried that this new economic system was stripping them of their humanity. And they found that keeping pets was a remarkably effective way to display sentimental virtue.
So it was like a moral flex.
That is exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Loving a dog, specifically a dog that didn't do any work, proved that you possessed a capacity for tender, disinterested affection.
Oh, wow.
It was a way of signaling to society and to yourself that you weren't completely corrupted by the cold, calculating transactional logic of the industrial factory floor.
You had a room in your heart to care for a vulnerable creature simply for the sake of caring.
Yes.
And when you look at the institutions that popped up during this exact window of time, it perfectly aligns with this idea of moral virtue.
Like the ASPCA.
Right, yes. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals is founded in 1866, and their early rhetoric heavily linked kindness to animals with your actual fundamental moral character as a human being.
That makes total sense in that context.
We also see the first formal pet cemeteries popping up in New York and London in the 1880s, which is a massive shift in how we view the afterlife and dignity of an animal.
A huge shift.
And the American Kennel Club is founded in 1884, introducing this whole complex discourse of breed, pedigree, and bloodlines.
And that institutionalization gives rise to the competitive dog show, which is another fascinating Victorian invention.
Like the Westminster Show.
Exactly. The Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show started in 1877.
1877, that is old.
To put the longevity of that into perspective for you, it is the second oldest continuously held sporting event in the United States, right behind the Kentucky Derby.
That is amazing.
The Victorians created this elaborate framework of adjudicating physical standards, categorizing breeds, and preserving bloodlines. And that framework embedded itself deeply into Western popular culture.
But this moral and aesthetic framework of the Victorians was about to collide with a radically changing physical environment in the 20th century.
Yes, the built environment changes everything again.
Which brings us to the post-World War II era, the birth of the modern American suburb. This is where the physical architecture of the country gets fundamentally rewritten.
The massive suburban boom.
Exactly. After the war, you have the federal government heavily subsidizing suburban homeownership through mechanisms like the GI Bill and FHA-backed mortgages.
Right.
Now, we must explicitly acknowledge that these policies were systematically and tragically discriminatory. Redlining meant that these opportunities were largely denied to Black Americans and other minorities.
That's highly exclusionary.
But for the white, middle, and working class, these policies created a sudden, massive wave of homeownership characterized by single-family detached homes, front lawns, backyards, fences, and an unprecedented level of domestic privacy.
And that specific architectural form, the fenced-in suburban yard, created the perfect physical infrastructure for keeping pets.
Specifically dogs.
Specifically dogs, yes. Suddenly, millions of people had dedicated, private outdoor space for a dog to run or relieve itself.
Which you just didn't have before.
Right, it was a logistical luxury you simply didn't have in dense urban apartment buildings or tenement housing.
But the suburb didn't just provide a physical space for the animal, did it?
No, it created a very specific psychological and social condition for the human.
It created profound structural isolation.
Precisely. The post-war American suburb was designed primarily around the automobile. It prioritized private space over public space.
You're in your car or in your house?
Exactly. It provided unprecedented quiet and privacy, but at the enormous cost of the dense, walkable, mixed-use communities that used to naturally generate casual social interaction.
Because in a traditional city neighborhood, you walked to the butcher, you walked to the pub, you sat on a stoop.
Right, but in the new suburb, there were often no sidewalks. You drove from your attached garage to the supermarket parking lot and back.
So you aren't really seeing anyone.
You weren't bumping into your neighbors because the environment was designed to prevent you from having to bump into your neighbors.
So into this quiet, private, increasingly isolated suburban space steps the companion animal. Nature abhors a vacuum, and human beings abhor total social isolation.
We need connection.
We do. The dog and the cat moved into the house to fill the void left by the disappearing extended family and the vanishing neighborhood community.
And we see this incredible semantic shift in the data that perfectly tracks this movement.
The language literally changes.
Yes. In the early 1970s, survey data showed that the vast majority of Americans still referred to their household dogs and cats as animals or pets.
Okay, early 70s.
But by the mid-1990s, just a couple of decades later, a massive paradigm shift had occurred. The vast majority of owners were now explicitly describing their pets as members of the family.
Members of the family.
And we really need to pause on that phrase. That is not just a casual change in vocabulary.
It really isn't.
It represents a fundamental psychological reorganization of the human-animal relationship.
Because when you classify a being as family, you drastically alter the moral obligations you feel toward them.
Exactly. You don't just feed a family member. You protect them. You worry about their emotional fulfillment. You ensure they have medical care.
And you grieve them as an equal when they pass. Before we go deeper into the modern consequences of that member of the family dynamic, I think it's crucial to point out a major blind spot we often have when discussing this.
Which is?
This very specific, highly humanized, let's buy the dog a birthday cake and a DNA test version of pet culture we are unpacking. It is not a universal human default.
Not at all.
It is a highly specific cultural construct, deeply rooted in an Anglo-American Protestant sentimentality.
Yeah, it is a vital piece of context.
Because if you step outside that specific cultural bubble, the human-animal relationship looks very different for you.
Different religious, geographical, and cultural traditions have entirely different historical frameworks for understanding what a pet is and where it belongs.
Right. Can you give an example?
Take Islamic legal and cultural tradition, for instance. There is a classical jurisprudence across several major schools of thought that regards dog saliva as ritually impure.
Oh, interesting.
Consequently, there are widely cited traditions discouraging the keeping of dogs purely as indoor companions unless they're serving a functional, necessary purpose.
Like guarding property or herding livestock.
Exactly, or serving as a guide dog. But even that strict interpretation is actively debated by reformist scholars today, who point to other traditions and stories of the Prophet Muhammad praying in the presence of dogs, arguing for a more nuanced relationship.
Right, and within that exact same Islamic tradition, there is a profound, almost revered affection for cats, isn't there?
Oh, deeply. You have historical figures like Abu Huraira, one of the Prophet's most prominent companions. His actual name translates to father of the kitten.
Because he carried a cat with him.
Yes, he was known to carry a small cat around in his sleeve.
Yeah.
There are stories of the Prophet cutting off the sleeve of his prayer garment rather than waking a sleeping cat that was resting on it.
That is so sweet.
Because of this deep-seated cultural history, when you look at survey data of American Muslim communities today, you see a demographic that skews heavily toward cat ownership or keeping dogs strictly for working or functional purposes.
Rather than purely indoor companions, we see varied and complex traditions elsewhere as well, right?
Definitely. Historically, in classical Jewish tradition, the keeping of pets for mere companionship was often viewed with some skepticism.
Why was that?
It was seen as a potential distraction from religious obligations, study, or charity toward other humans. The focus was heavily on the ethical treatment of working animals, ensuring they rested on the Sabbath, for example.
Rather than keeping them as indoor family members.
Right. Though, it should be noted, that has shifted considerably among younger Jewish demographics today, who heavily mirror broader secular American pet-keeping trends.
And if we look at Native American communities, prior to European contact and the introduction of the horse, dogs were widely kept and deeply integrated into daily life.
They were essential.
They were used extensively for hauling goods using a travois, for hunting, for camp security, and often held specific roles in spiritual and ceremonial contexts. Their utility and their spiritual significance were intertwined.
The point of walking you through these different traditions isn't to rank them or say one is better than the other.
Right, of course not. The goal is to realize that this hyper-sentimental, consumer-driven pet culture we live in isn't just the way human beings are.
It is a specific cultural and economic phenomenon.
But it's a phenomenon that has been absolutely supercharged in recent years, particularly by a massive global event, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, the pandemic changed everything.
The data shows that the pandemic basically took decades of slow, simmering sociological change regarding pets and compressed it into an explosive 18 months.
It was incredible to watch.
Lockdowns hit, people were trapped in their homes facing unimaginable anxiety and isolation, and animal shelters literally emptied out. There were weeks-long wait lists just to get a rescue dog.
The surge in adoptions made global headlines. But if you look at the economics and the sociology, the really fascinating story isn't the initial surge itself.
What is it then?
Well, it is entirely human nature to seek out companionship during a period of acute, terrifying isolation. The real story is the persistence of the behavior.
The stickiness of it.
Exactly. When the lockdowns eventually ended, when the offices mandated a return to work, when restaurants and bars reopened, the spending and the devotion did not retreat.
We didn't see mass, unprecedented waves of people returning their pandemic pets to shelters once they could go back to brunch.
No, we didn't. The new elevated baseline for spending on premium pet food, on highly specialized veterinary care, on anxiety vests and dog walkers, it not only stayed elevated, it continued to grow.
The pandemic essentially locked in a new psychological standard of care.
It really did.
Which perfectly transitions us because people couldn't stay locked in their houses forever, into how we have attempted to engineer public spaces to manage this new, intense relationship.
We needed a place to put them.
We couldn't just keep our family members in the backyard. We needed to integrate them into the public square. So let's talk about the physical infrastructure we built for them. Let's talk about the dog park.
The modern dog park is a brilliant, almost accidental example of urban infrastructure evolving to meet a new social need.
I find the origin story of this so fascinating because it wasn't some grand urban planning masterstroke.
Not at all.
It takes us to Berkeley, California in 1979. There was this long strip of reclaimed land along Hearst Avenue. It used to be a construction trench for the BART transit system, and it had just been covered over.
Okay, I can picture it.
A local resident named Doris Richards essentially spearheaded a grassroots neighborhood movement to create a dedicated, fenced-in space where dogs could legally run off-leash.
And she wasn't trying to invent a new category of urban sociology, was she?
No, she was just trying to solve basic neighborhood friction noise complaints, arguments over leash laws, dogs running into traffic.
Just practical stuff.
But what resulted was Olone Park, widely recognized as the first official municipal off-leash dog park in the United States.
And what Doris Richards and her fellow community organizers didn't realize at the time, but what sociologists quickly recognized, was that they weren't just building a place for dogs to exercise.
What were they building?
They were building a highly efficient, powerful engine for generating human social capital.
Social capital.
Yes. To understand why this matters, we have to bring in the framework of the renowned sociologist Robert Putnam, who wrote the seminal book, Bowling Alone.
Oh, right. The bowling leagues.
Exactly. Putnam's work focuses on how Americans have become increasingly disconnected from one another. He distinguishes between two distinct types of social capital: bonding social capital and bridging social capital.
Okay, let's break those down for the listener. Bonding social capital is the tight stuff, right?
Exactly. Bonding social capital refers to the dense, strong, emotionally heavy ties you have within homogeneous groups.
Like your family.
Yes, your immediate family, your tight circle of lifelong friends, perhaps a very close-knit religious congregation. These are the people who will lend you money in a crisis or visit you in the hospital.
That makes sense.
Bonding capital provides crucial emotional and functional support, but it tends to be exclusive and inward-looking.
And then you have bridging social capital, which is what we seem to be losing in modern society.
Precisely. Bridging social capital refers to the weaker, broader, more diffuse ties that connect different groups of people across demographic, economic, or social lines.
So like the casual chat you have with the barista at your local coffee shop.
Exactly. Or the neighbor you wave to when taking out the trash. The person you chat with in line at the post office.
These ties don't provide deep emotional support.
No, but they are the glue that holds a diverse, democratic society together. They create a generalized sense of societal trust and civic belonging.
And this is where the genius of the dog comes in, because dogs are basically the ultimate biological hack for bridging social capital.
It's so true.
Think about your own life. Approaching a total stranger in a standard city park, sitting down next to them on a bench, and just starting a conversation about the weather is terrifying for most people.
It feels invasive.
It violates all our unwritten, modern, urban rules of privacy and minding your own business. But introduce a dog into that scenario, and the entire social physics changes.
A dog is the ultimate icebreaker.
Yes, it provides a completely neutral, incredibly low-stakes pretext for a conversation.
It acts as a social lubricant.
Exactly. You don't have to talk about politics or your job. You just say, oh, what a handsome dog. Is he a mix? How old is she? Can I pet him?
Right, the focus is off the humans.
You are interacting with the animal, which allows the humans to interact with each other safely. And the best part is the built-in escape hatch.
The escape ad.
Yeah, if the conversation gets weird or awkward or you just want to leave, you don't have to invent a polite excuse. You just look down at your dog, pull slightly on the leash, and say, okay, buddy, looks like you're ready to go. Have a good one. And you walk away.
That is brilliant. It lowers the barrier to entry for human connection to almost zero.
It really does.
Urban sociologists use Ray Oldenburg's concept of the third place to describe what the dog park has become.
The third place.
Yes. In Oldenburg's framework, your home is the first place, a place of domestic duty and family. Your workplace is the second place, a realm of professional obligation and hierarchy.
Okay, so what is the third place?
The third place is the local cafe, the traditional English pub, the village square, the barbershop. It is a neutral ground where informal, low-stakes social life happens.
People just hanging out.
People gather there not out of obligation, but for the pleasure of company. As the post-war, car-centric suburbs actively stripped away those traditional third places by zoning commercial and residential areas far apart, the dog park emerged organically to fill the massive aching void.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
It generates what sociologists call ambient sociality. You don't go to the dog park to make a best friend. You go to share a physical space with a familiar, rotating cast of faces, which creates a vital sense of neighborhood trust.
It sounds incredibly utopian when we describe it like that. A democratic space where the CEO and the barista stand shoulder to shoulder throwing tennis balls.
It does sound nice.
But we have to look at the reality on the ground, and the reality is that the dog park is not some flawless, egalitarian paradise. There is a very real dark side to how this infrastructure is deployed.
Yes, we have to remember a fundamental rule of urban policy. Infrastructure is never neutral. A park is never just a park. It is a statement of priorities and power.
How does that apply to dog parks?
Well, in recent years, researchers tracking urban development have highlighted how the installation of high-end dog parks in historically working-class or minority neighborhoods often acts as a glaring early marker of aggressive gentrification.
Wait, how does a dog park displace people? It's literally just a fenced-in piece of grass.
It's about who the infrastructure is signaling to. Let's look at cities like Washington, D.C., or parts of Brooklyn, where this dynamic has been heavily studied.
Okay.
A city council will take an underutilized plot of land in a historically black neighborhood and invest heavily in transforming it into a pristine dog park with water fountains and specialized turf.
But maybe the community wanted something else.
Exactly. The existing community might have been lobbying for years for a renovated playground for their children, or better street lighting, or an upgraded community center. Instead, they get a dog park. The amenity is fundamentally designed to serve and attract incoming, affluent, often white residents who own these companion animals, rather than serving the pressing needs of the existing community.
So it's catering to the newcomers.
So while the park successfully creates bridging capital for the new, affluent dog owners, it simultaneously signals cultural and economic displacement to the legacy residents. The dog park becomes a highly contested, politicized space.
That is such a vital point. We build these physical architectures, like dog parks, to facilitate our social lives with our dogs and make ourselves feel like good pet parents.
Right.
But what really blew my mind when looking at the economics of this industry is the financial architecture we have built to keep these animals alive. It is staggering in its complexity and its cost.
You're talking about insurance?
I am talking about the explosive rise of pet insurance.
This is where we see the actuarial logic of human love laid bare.
It is so bizarre and fascinating. Let's trace the history. Do you know when the first pet insurance policy was issued in the United States?
When was it?
It was 1982, and it wasn't issued to a normal family dog. It was issued to the famous TV dog, Lassie.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes. It was essentially launched as a clever PR stunt by a nascent industry trying to figure out if Americans would actually pay a monthly premium for an animal.
That is hilarious.
For a long time, it remained a niche product. But then, veterinary medicine underwent a technological revolution. Today, we aren't just taking dogs in for a rabies shot, a heartworm pill, and an ear infection check. The technological parity between human and veterinary medicine is astounding.
The clinical capabilities have skyrocketed.
We are doing MRIs on cats. We are doing specialized radiation and chemotherapy on dogs. We are doing total hip replacements. There are veterinary pacemakers.
It's basically human medicine.
I was looking at the costs, and a dog diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is bone cancer, can now undergo limb-sparing surgery. Instead of just amputating the leg, they remove the tumor and reconstruct the bone.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
That surgery, along with the required follow-up oncology care, can cost anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000.
And that profound leap in medical capability creates an entirely new, agonizing category of problem for the modern pet owner.
How so?
It creates a scenario where an emergency financial decision must be made under conditions of extreme, blinding emotional duress.
Oh, man.
Imagine a family's dog suddenly collapses in the backyard. They rush to the emergency vet. The vet diagnoses a bleeding mass on the spleen.
A total crisis.
They say, we can rush him into surgery right now and likely save his life, but it requires a blood transfusion and intensive care. The estimate is $8,000. I need your signature and a credit card right now to proceed.
You are asking a terrified, grieving person to do high-stakes financial calculus in an emergency room lobby.
Exactly. And the veterinary profession is so intimately familiar with this trauma that they have coined a clinical term for it: economic euthanasia.
Economic euthanasia, that is devastating.
It is one of the most devastating things a vet or an owner can experience.
Yeah.
It is when you have to choose to euthanize an animal, not because their condition is medically hopeless, not because they are inevitably going to suffer, but solely because you simply cannot afford the treatment to save them.
You are putting them down because your bank account dictates it.
Yes.
And this is where the uniquely American psychology of this whole system snaps into focus. Think about how almost every other wealthy, industrialized nation in the world handles the catastrophic cost of human healthcare.
They handle it collectively.
Exactly. They handle it through some form of collective provision, national health insurance, single-payer systems, heavily regulated statutory sick funds. They have societal mechanisms designed to prevent an individual citizen from bearing the total crushing brunt of a catastrophic medical emergency.
Right.
But in America, our cultural and political default is to rely on highly complex, privatized insurance markets. We navigate premiums, annual deductibles, copays, out-of-network exclusions, lifetime caps, the whole exhausting apparatus.
Because that uniquely American privatized framework is the only vocabulary we have for managing healthcare risk, pet owners instinctively applied that exact same fraught market logic to their animals.
Wow. Yes.
It is fascinating from a sociological standpoint. Pet insurance in America really began to see explosive double-digit growth during the exact same decades that out-of-pocket human healthcare costs were becoming a primary source of personal bankruptcy.
People were already terrified of medical bills.
Americans already intimately knew the dread of navigating deductibles and premiums for their own mortal bodies, so they seamlessly transferred that exact same financial architecture onto their dogs and cats. They bought policies to hedge against the catastrophe.
But when you actually open up the hood of the pet insurance industry and look at the actuarial tables, the mathematical formulas they use to calculate how much to charge you every month, it gets incredibly dark.
It really does.
Because I have to ask, aren't we in many cases just paying massive monthly premiums to insure against the suffering that we deliberately, intentionally bred into these animals in the first place?
That is the grim reality that the actuarial tables reveal in black and white.
Can you explain that?
The pricing of pet insurance is essentially a mathematical ledger of human aesthetic choices and their biological consequences. Let's look at the English bulldog, which is consistently one of the most expensive breeds to insure.
Because they have so many health problems?
Yes. Over a century, humans selectively bred the English bulldog for a very specific, exaggerated aesthetic. An incredibly flat face, a massive blocky head, and a stout, wide body.
Because we think it looks cute.
We bred them to look that way because we find it appealing or amusing, but that purely aesthetic choice resulted in severe, chronic biological failures.
What kind of failures?
They suffer from brachycephalic airway syndrome. They literally struggle to pull enough oxygen into their lungs. They have chronic hip dysplasia.
That's horrible.
And because their heads are now so disproportionately large compared to their narrow pelvises, a staggering percentage of English bulldog litters must be delivered surgically via C-section. The natural birthing process is physically impossible.
So, when an insurance company writes a policy for a bulldog,
the premium is astronomical because catastrophic medical intervention isn't a mere possibility. It is a near certainty engineered by our own breeding practices.
It's horrifying when you frame it that way. We are paying to fix the machines we deliberately broke.
Right.
And it's not just bulldogs. The data points out that Bernese mountain dogs, which are beautiful, highly sought-after family dogs, have been bred through such tight genetic bottlenecks that they are incredibly prone to aggressive forms of cancer at a young age.
It's tragic.
Or look at dachshunds, the classic wiener dog. We bred them to have these comically long spines and tiny stubby legs, which makes them highly susceptible to intervertebral disc disease, leading to paralysis and requiring $10,000 spinal surgeries.
We manufacture these severe health defects for the sake of aesthetics.
And now we've constructed a multi-billion-dollar financial instrument to manage the inevitable fallout.
And yet, despite the biological paradox of why the care is needed, we have to look at what the consumer actually believes they are buying.
What are they buying?
As behavioral economists point out, the real product being sold by a pet insurance company isn't just financial mitigation. If you crunch the numbers purely mathematically, many pet owners will pay more in premiums over the life of the dog than they will ever get back in claims.
But they keep paying. Why?
Because what they are actually purchasing is anticipatory grief management.
Anticipatory grief management.
Yeah.
That phrase is chilling, but it is so incredibly accurate. It perfectly names the anxiety.
It resolves a profound, lingering psychological dread.
Right.
Behavioral economics repeatedly demonstrates that human beings loathe unpredictable losses. We will pay a premium just for certainty.
Sure.
But for a pet owner, the unpredictable loss isn't just a sudden financial hit like a car breaking down. The loss is the agonizing, haunting fear that one day you will be standing in that emergency vet lobby and you will be forced to put a literal dollar price on your love for this animal.
Wow.
By paying that $80 or $100 every single month, the owner is fundamentally buying peace of mind. They're buying the absolute certainty that if the worst happens, they will never have to choose between draining their children's college fund and saving their dog's life.
They're paying to ensure their love remains financially unconditional.
Exactly.
So we use insurance to manage our terror of future grief. But how do we manage our daily mundane guilt?
Oh, the guilt.
Because that brings us to a multi-billion-dollar industry that guilt literally built from the ground up: doggy daycare.
The daycare economy is the ultimate realization of the semantic shift we discussed earlier. The shift from seeing oneself as an owner to seeing oneself as a pet parent.
Words matter.
They do. The term owner implies property, like owning a toaster or a bicycle. You don't feel guilty when you leave your toaster alone in the kitchen all day.
Of course not.
But parent implies a heavy, ongoing moral obligation of care, enrichment, and emotional stewardship.
Exactly. If you identify as a parent, you apply parenting standards. Good parents do not lock their human toddlers in a small, silent room alone for 9 hours a day while they commute to the office.
Right.
So if you have internalized the identity of a pet parent and you understand, because the internet and your vet are constantly telling you, that dogs are deeply social, pack-oriented animals that experience measurable cortisol spikes and separation anxiety when isolated.
You are suddenly burdened with massive guilt.
Massive, crushing guilt every time you pick up your keys to drive to work. You look at those sad eyes as you close the door and you feel like a moral failure.
And in a highly functioning consumer economy, wherever there is middle-class guilt, there is a market waiting with a premium solution.
Always.
The pet daycare and boarding sector is a massive, incredibly lucrative pillar of what economists classify as a $12 billion other services category in the pet industry.
For $12 billion.
And what is truly fascinating is how the physical and operational architecture of these doggy daycares is explicitly, painstakingly designed to mirror human childcare facilities.
It is uncanny. It is literally just preschool, but for golden retrievers.
Yeah.
I have friends who use these services, and the level of detail is insane.
What did they do?
You drop the dog off, and at the end of the day, you get a literal report card handed to you by a staff member.
A report card for a dog.
Yes. The report card details who your dog's best friends were that day, what their mood was like. Buster was feeling a little shy in the morning, but really opened up during bubble time.
Bubble time.
You can log into a proprietary app on your phone and watch your dog on a live webcam while you sit in your office cubicle. They schedule structured play dates, enforce nap times with classical music, and they even do art projects where the dogs step in non-toxic paint and walk across a canvas.
That is just wow.
They throw birthday parties for the dogs, complete with party hats and specialized dog-friendly cakes. And we have to stop and state the obvious here.
Which is?
The dogs do not care about the birthday cake. The dog does not understand the concept of a calendar year or a birthday.
Obviously not.
The art project and the birthday party are entirely 100% for the human owner. It is content for their social media feed. It proves to the world, and more importantly, it proves to themselves that they are providing premium enrichment. It alleviates the guilt.
This phenomenon you're describing is a textbook extreme example of anthropomorphism, the psychological process of attributing human characteristics, emotions, and desires to non-human entities.
Is this something that can be measured?
Actually, yes, psychologists have studied this extensively. There are actual metrics, like the attachment scales developed by researchers Zelchermano, Mikulencer, and Shaver.
What do the scales measure?
These scales measure how intensely an owner attaches to their pet and how much they anthropomorphize them. And the economic correlation is absolute.
People who anthropomorphize spend more.
Significantly more. Owners who score higher on these scales of emotional attachment and anthropomorphism spend way more money. They buy the premium products, they pay for the daycare, and they authorize the most aggressive, expensive veterinary treatments.
It's all connected.
The industry knows that if they can encourage you to view your dog as a furry human child, your price sensitivity almost completely disappears.
Which perfectly explains the absolute explosion of the organic, human-grade pet food trend. I actually laughed out loud when I was reviewing the history of this because the cyclical irony of capitalism is just too perfect. Let's trace the food journey because it is wild.
It really is a full circle moment that perfectly illustrates how industries invent problems to sell solutions.
Right. So go back to the 1950s and 60s. The nascent commercial pet food industry launched massive, highly coordinated lobbying and marketing campaigns to convince the American public that feeding dogs scraps from the family dinner table was nutritionally deficient, unbalanced, and basically dangerous.
They had to create a market.
They told everyone, stop giving your dog real meat and vegetables. You must buy our highly processed, scientifically formulated, shelf-stable kibble in a bag. They successfully monetized getting dogs off human food and onto an industrial product.
They created a massive manufacturing sector based on processing meat byproducts and cheap grains into an extruded, dried product.
Now, fast forward to today, and the market trend is entirely 180 degrees reversed.
It's all about fresh food now.
The hottest, fastest growing segment of the premium pet market is all about feeding dogs human-grade, organic, minimally processed meals. You have companies selling subscription boxes of freshly cooked beef, quinoa, and kale that arrive frozen in dry ice.
It looks like our food.
The food looks exactly like what a health-conscious human would buy for themselves at Whole Foods. The marketing now says, how could you feed your beloved family member highly processed industrial kibble? Feed them real, fresh food.
The irony is amazing.
The industry literally managed to monetize the industrialization of the dog's dinner in the 1950s, and now, 70 years later, they are making billions monetizing the deindustrialization of it, selling the exact same demographic on the virtue of fresh meat and veggies.
They are seamlessly selling the same customer base the problem, and then decades later, selling them the vastly more expensive solution.
It's brilliant, honestly.
But the organic, human-grade food trend highlights something deeper than just clever marketing. It proves that this spending isn't fundamentally about biological utility. It's about expression.
Right, because the dog doesn't care.
The dog would likely survive just fine on standard kibble. But feeding the dog a premium, organic meal allows the owner to express their own class identity, their health consciousness, and their devotion.
We feed them like us, we parent them like us with daycares, and increasingly we want to trace their ancestry and identity just like us.
Which sets up another booming, slightly baffling sector of the companionship economy.
What's that?
The market for dog DNA tests. Companies like Embark and Wisdom Panel have basically created a $200 million industry out of convincing people to swab their dog's cheek and mail it into a lab.
Now, to be fair, there are some legitimate clinical benefits to this technology, right?
Sure, if a DNA test reveals that your mixed-breed dog carries a specific genetic mutation, like the MDR1 gene, which affects how they metabolize certain anesthetics and medications, that is highly valuable information for your vet to have before they take the dog into surgery. It can literally save the dog's life.
But let's be completely real with each other. That rare clinical utility is not why millions of people are buying these kits as Christmas presents.
No, absolutely not. The primary driver of the DNA test market is narrative. It is a deep-seated human desire for identity and categorization.
Exactly. Think about how we view purebred dogs versus shelter mutts. If you go to a breeder and buy a purebred golden retriever or a beagle, you are buying a legible biography.
Right, you know what you're getting.
You know its history, you know the supposed temperament of the breed, you know what it was historically bred to do. The dog comes with a pre-written origin story.
And with a mutt.
If you do what society encourages and you adopt a mixed breed dog from a county shelter, the classic all-American mutt, it's a complete blank slate. You have no idea where it came from or what's in its blood.
And human beings, particularly in Western individualistic cultures, are deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with blank slates when it comes to our intimate relationship.
We want to know the backstory.
We crave narrative infrastructure. We want to know the why behind the who. So a family swabs their scruffy shelter dog, mails it in, and waits for the email.
The big reveal.
When the results come back and they find out their dog is 30% American Staffordshire Terrier, 40% Poodle, and 30% Siberian Husky, it is a momentous event for the family.
Yeah.
But let's pause and look at reality here.
Yes, let's look at reality.
Receiving that email does not change a single physical, biological, or behavioral trait of that dog.
Right. Does knowing my dog is 30% husky actually change the dog? No. The dog is exactly the same biological entity today as it was yesterday before I opened my inbox.
It doesn't bark differently, it doesn't run faster, it doesn't love you more.
The dog doesn't change at all. What changes is the frame through which the human owner interprets the dog.
That makes a lot of sense.
Suddenly, every quirk is explainable. That stubborn streak the dog has, oh, that's the husky in him. The way he vocalizes when the doorbell rings. That's his terrier side.
It anchors the dog's random personality traits in a historical genetic narrative.
Exactly. It makes the dog feel more legible, more understood. But the profound truth is that the DNA test, the colorful pie chart of breeds, can't actually provide the thing that makes the dog deeply lovable.
That only comes from the lived experience.
The actual intimacy only comes from the time spent together, the specific, unquantifiable quirks developed over years of shared life. The DNA test is just expressive spending. It's buying a story to tell at the dog park.
So this brings us to a massive critical juncture. If the expensive organic food and the elaborate daycare birthday parties and the DNA tests don't actually change the fundamental nature of the dog's affection for us.
Because they really don't.
Right. If a dog will love you just as much if you feed it cheap kibble and never test its DNA, why are we as a society choosing to spend $147 billion on all of this?
It's the big question.
This forces us into a massive sociological debate. Is this exploding companionship economy undeniable proof that we are a profoundly lonely, broken, alienated society desperately buying affection? Or does it simply mean we are an incredibly rich, affluent society that has run out of basic needs to fulfill and is just spending its excess cash on its hobbies?
This is the great overarching debate when analyzing the pet economy. The loneliness thesis versus the abundance thesis. Let's start with the loneliness thesis because the sociological and public health data supporting it is incredibly grim and, frankly, very compelling.
What does the data say?
In 2023, the United States Surgeon General took the extraordinary step of issuing a formal public health advisory on an epidemic of loneliness and social isolation.
I remember that.
The report stated that the mortality impact of severe chronic social isolation is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
15 cigarettes a day. That is terrifying.
Loneliness is literally killing people by elevating stress, increasing cardiovascular disease, and degrading the immune system. And you see the collapse of social infrastructure everywhere.
No, it's pretty apparent.
The Survey Center on American Life released data that is just heartbreaking. They found that in 2021, 15% of American men reported having absolutely zero close friends. Zero. If they had a crisis, there was no one they felt they could call.
And what was that number historically?
To put that in perspective, in 1990, that number was just 3%. We are witnessing, in real time, a structural collapse of friendship and community.
And into that massive aching void steps the companion animal. The physiological science behind why pets work as a balm for loneliness is settled.
How does it work physically?
When a human interacts with a dog or a cat petting them, making eye contact, it triggers a measurable physiological response. It actively lowers human cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone.
Okay, lower stress. Simultaneously, it stimulates the release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone or love hormone. Pets provide something that is increasingly rare in modern human relationships: consistent, unconditional, positive regard.
A dog doesn't care if you got passed over for a promotion at work. It doesn't judge your physical appearance or how much money you have in the bank.
No, it doesn't.
And crucially, in our modern era, a dog is never distracted by its smartphone while you are trying to talk to it. It offers total, unblinking presence.
But there is a heartbreaking caveat to the loneliness thesis.
Which is?
For people who are deeply chronically isolated, treating pets aggressively as fur babies, using them as total surrogate children or surrogate spouses, can sometimes act as a maladaptive coping mechanism.
It can mask a deeper grief.
Exactly. The unconditional love of the dog makes the loneliness just tolerable enough that the person stops doing the hard, messy, vulnerable work of trying to build human relationships, which are inherently fraught with conflict and the risk of rejection.
The dog becomes a safe, controllable substitute for human intimacy. Yes, and of course, the market does not care about this psychological nuance. A pet supply company will sell a premium subscription box to a lonely, isolated widower using his dog as a lifeline just as happily as they will sell it to anyone else.
That is the tragic view. But we have to give equal weight to the counterargument, which pushes back hard against this narrative of a broken, desperate society. This is the abundance thesis.
Yes, the abundance thesis demands a serious hearing. This argument challenges the entire premise that we are more isolated than ever.
How does it challenge that?
First, sociologists point out that the methodology behind Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, the famous book claiming civic life is dying, has been heavily critiqued over the years.
Really?
Scholars like Claude Fisher argued way back in 2005 that Putnam was too nostalgic. Fisher suggested Putnam was ignoring new, emerging forms of association.
Like what?
Sure, maybe Americans aren't joining bowling leagues or the Elks Club like they did in 1965, but they're connecting in different ways: online communities, niche hobby groups, and, yes, dog parks.
So the abundance thesis basically argues for the simplest, most direct economic explanation. We spend more money on pets today because we simply have more disposable income than previous generations.
It's just about the money.
If you look at the primary demographic driving the explosion in pet spending, it heavily skews toward college-educated dual-income households, often without children or with delayed parenthood.
Their real household wealth has risen substantially over the last few decades.
Furthermore, as we discussed, veterinary technology has vastly improved. So the formula is simple. When you have vastly more disposable income and your local vet suddenly acquires a state-of-the-art MRI machine that didn't exist 20 years ago, you spend the money on the MRI.
Right.
You don't need to invent a sprawling national crisis of loneliness and despair to explain why rich people buy expensive medical care for animals they like.
And the comparative international evidence heavily supports the abundance thesis as well.
Oh, how so?
If the explosion in pet spending was purely a symptom of an American disease caused by our unique car-centric suburban isolation, our lack of walkable cities, and our frayed social safety nets, you wouldn't expect to see the exact same trends in countries with completely different social structures.
But we do see it.
Yes. If you look at the UK, Japan, and the Nordic countries, you see the exact same skyrocketing trends in pet humanization, premium food sales, and the adoption of pet insurance.
And those countries have highly dense, walkable cities.
They do, and robust public transit, and strong, comprehensive social welfare states, yet they are humanizing their pets at similar rates.
So what does that mean?
This strongly suggests that the companionship economy is more a byproduct of late modern global affluence and shrinking household sizes than a symptom of uniquely American suburban collapse.
So which thesis is right? Are we a nation of lonely souls buying affection, or are we just a wealthy society with money to burn on our hobbies?
The synthesis of all this data is that they are both entirely true.
The consumer market is vast and agnostic enough to contain multitudes. The $147 billion figure contains the deeply isolated elderly widower who is spending his meager pension on his cat because it is his only daily source of physical touch and comfort.
Yes.
And that exact same financial figure also contains the wealthy, dual-income, childless by choice couple in a luxury condo who just really genuinely adore their French bulldog and have the disposable cash to buy it a designer stroller and organic venison treats.
The motivation varies, but the capital aggregates. And regardless of the underlying psychological motivation of the individual owner, this massive aggregated influx of capital has physically and politically reshaped our broader society.
Once a market gets that big, it changes things.
When an industry reaches $147 billion, it is no longer just a niche consumer category. The sheer scale of this economy means it exerts real, undeniable gravity on our national politics, on economic equity, and on the global environment.
Let's start with the politics, because the political symbolism of pets is fascinating. Politicians are ruthless pragmatists, and they have long understood that using a pet is the ultimate shorthand for relatability and moral character.
If you want to seem like a good, normal person, you get a dog.
Exactly. We can look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his famous Scottish Terrier, Fala. In 1944, during a grueling re-election campaign, a rumor was started by Republican opponents that FDR had accidentally left Fala behind on the Aleutian Islands during a trip, and that he had dispatched a U.S. Navy destroyer at massive taxpayer expense to turn around and retrieve the dog.
Oh, a classic political smear.
Right. And FDR didn't just ignore the rumor, he weaponized it. He used a nationally broadcast campaign address to a Teamsters union to passionately defend the dog's honor.
He defended the dog.
Yes. He essentially said, you can criticize my wife, you can criticize me, but you cannot criticize my little dog. His Scottish soul was furious. The crowd went wild. It was a masterclass in using the universal affection for pets to deflect political attacks.
We see an even more desperate and effective deployment of this tactic with Richard Nixon in 1952.
Oh, the checkers speech.
Exactly. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice presidential running mate, but he was suddenly engulfed in a scandal regarding an allegedly improper slush fund from wealthy donors. The pressure was mounting for Eisenhower to drop him from the ticket. His career was on the verge of total collapse.
So what did he do?
So Nixon buys half an hour of national television time and delivers what is now famously known as the Checker speech. He meticulously details his finances, but the emotional climax of the speech is when he admits that a supporter in Texas did give his family one gift, a little black and white Cocker Spaniel named Checkers.
He brought a puppy into it.
He looks into the camera and defiantly states that his young daughters love the dog, and regardless of what his political critics say, they are going to keep it. The public response was overwhelmingly sympathetic. It completely neutralized the scandal and saved his political career.
Because loving a dog signals to the voting public that you are capable of uncomplicated, unperformed affection. The implicit logic is, if you love a dog and the dog loves you, you can't be a totally corrupt monster.
Exactly.
But the political power of pets goes far beyond just optics and campaign speeches. The pet industry today wields actual, hard lobbying power in Washington. We can look at the massive 2007 pet food recall crisis as a prime example of this muscle.
Yes. 2007 was a watershed moment that exposed the sheer scale and vulnerability of the global pet economy.
What happened exactly?
Well, ingredients contaminated with melamine, a chemical used in plastics, were imported from China and found their way into the supply chains of dozens of major widespread commercial pet food brands.
Oh, that's awful.
Thousands, and potentially tens of thousands, of pets across North America were sickened or died from acute renal failure. It was a massive tragedy that exposed glaring systemic holes in how pet food was regulated and inspected compared to human food.
Right. Did anything change?
The public outcry generated intense political pressure on Congress, which eventually helped lead to the passage of the Food Safety Modernization Act in 2011, which included new preventative controls for animal food.
Okay, so a win for the consumer.
Partially.
Mm-hmm.
But what is telling about the industry's lobbying power is that even in the face of that tragedy, they successfully resisted the most stringent, costly regulations, ensuring that pet food oversight remained significantly lighter and less burdensome than the regulations governing human food production.
The lobbying power extends deep into veterinary care as well, you know. There are constant, ongoing legislative battles at the state level over the scope of practice. Basically fighting over who can legally perform certain medical procedures, veterinarians versus veterinary technicians. These lobbying fights directly dictate the scarcity and therefore the cost of veterinary care.
Right.
And when we talk about the cost of care, that brings up the massive, uncomfortable issue of inequality. Because the pet economy today perfectly ruthlessly mirrors American economic inequality.
It is a stark geographic division. If you drive through an affluent, upper-middle-class neighborhood, you see an economy of total abundance.
Yeah, organic treats, specialty clinics.
You see a density of boutique, independent pet food stores, holistic veterinary clinics offering acupuncture and hydrotherapy, and massive doggy daycare centers. The infrastructure of extreme care is everywhere.
But if you go to a low-income area...
If you drive into a low-income neighborhood, you often find a veterinary desert. Preventive, routine veterinary care is often entirely absent. A family living there might only have access to a corporate emergency clinic located miles away, where the baseline cost just to walk in the door is vastly more expensive than a routine checkup would be.
And the result of that two-tier system is absolutely heartbreaking when you look at the statistics of the shelter system. Data consistently points out that when animals are surrendered to municipal shelters, it is disproportionately done by lower-income households.
And it's not because they don't care about the animals.
Exactly. They aren't surrendering the animals because they don't love them. They're surrendering them because they are facing a housing crisis and moving into an apartment that bans dogs. Or they're hit with a catastrophic veterinary bill for a simple injury that they simply cannot afford to pay.
Then what happened?
Then those exact same animals enter the rescue system and are disproportionately adopted out to middle and upper class households who have the financial resources, the fenced yards, and the disposable income to keep them.
So the rescue system, structurally, despite its noble intentions, is operating as a mechanism that transfers companion animals up the income ladder.
It's a devastating reality of how love is constrained by capital. And alongside this economic inequality, we also cannot ignore the environmental footprint of this abundance.
This is a topic that makes many cat owners deeply uncomfortable, but the data is undeniable.
The environmental impact is huge.
The extreme humanization of pets, specifically the trend of feeding them premium, meat-heavy, human-grade diets, has a massive cascading ecological cost.
Someone did a study on this, didn't they?
Yes, a landmark 2017 study out of UCLA by researcher Gregory Ocken attempted to quantify this. He found that the meat consumption required to sustain the U.S. dog and cat population accounts for roughly 25% of the environmental impact of all U.S. animal agriculture.
Let's repeat that for emphasis for you listening. 25%. A quarter of the land use, the water use, the fossil fuels, the methane emissions associated with raising livestock in America is driven by pet food. That is wild.
It really is.
And because consumers have shifted away from the old kibble made of byproducts and grain and moved toward these grain-free, ultra-high-protein diets, or even worse for the environment, fresh food subscriptions that require individual plastic packaging and refrigerated shipping across the country, the carbon footprint of feeding a golden retriever is absolutely skyrocketing.
It is a direct conflict between our desire to pamper our pets and the necessity of mitigating climate change.
But it's not just the food, is it?
No, then you have the environmental impact of cats, which is a highly explosive topic in conservation circles. A major study published in the journal Nature Communications estimated the predatory impact of free-ranging domestic cats, which includes both feral populations and owned cats allowed outdoors.
How many birds are we talking about here?
The estimates are staggering. They calculate that domestic cats kill billions, with a B, billions of wild birds and billions of small mammals in the U.S. every single year.
That's insane.
It creates this intense, ongoing, bitter conflict between animal welfare advocates who want to protect and feed feral cat colonies through trap-neuter-return programs and conservation biologists who are watching native bird populations get absolutely decimated by an introduced, subsidized predator.
It really forces us to confront the fact that treating our pets to these human-grade lifestyles and allowing them to exist outside the bounds of utility carries profound, often destructive consequences for the rest of the natural world.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
But perhaps the most dramatic structural change happening in the entire pet economy is taking place completely out of sight of the average consumer. It's happening right behind the reception desk at your local, trusted veterinary clinic.
Yes, the business side.
This brings us to the rise of the veterinary industrial complex. This was the part of the data that legitimately made me sit up straight and rethink everything. We are talking about the massive, stealthy, private equity takeover of veterinary medicine.
The pace and scale of this corporate consolidation is breathtaking, and most pet owners are completely unaware it is happening. Let's look at the timeline.
Okay, when did this start?
In 2010, only about 1 in 10 veterinary practices in the United States were owned by a corporation. They were mostly small, independent businesses owned by the vet who examined your dog.
Right, mom and pop shops.
Today, corporate consolidators and private equity firms account for roughly half of all domestic veterinary revenue. And more importantly, they own about 3/4 of the specialty and emergency practices, which are the most lucrative sectors of the industry.
I was looking at the financial reporting, and between 2017 and 2023 alone, private equity firms spent over $50 billion acquiring independent vet practices.
Right.
$50 billion.
It's massive money.
Why? Why are Wall Street titans suddenly obsessed with your local animal hospital? Because it is a near-perfect cash-pay business. Unlike human medicine, which is a bureaucratic nightmare, heavily dictated by massive government payers like Medicare and Medicaid negotiating prices down, veterinary medicine is largely a direct consumer-to-business transaction.
Exactly.
And most importantly, they are dealing with a consumer base that exhibits what economists call inelastic demand.
We really need to unpack inelastic demand because it is the cold economic engine driving this entire buyout frenzy.
Right. What does it mean?
In economics, demand is elastic if raising the price causes people to stop buying the product. If the price of a specific brand of cereal doubles, you just buy a different cereal.
Makes sense.
But demand is inelastic when a massive price increase does not significantly reduce consumption. People love their pets so intensely and view them so completely as family members that they will pay almost anything, take on immense credit card debt, or drain their savings to save them.
So there's no cap.
Private equity recognizes that the raw emotional intensity of the human-pet bond provides ultimate, almost unchecked pricing power. You cannot easily negotiate or walk away when the patient is a creature you love that is bleeding on an exam table.
But what does this corporate takeover actually mean for the vet who is treating your dog and for the pet itself? When a beloved local independent clinic is bought out by a multinational corporation, what changes?
Well, reports from within the industry highlight that veterinarians suddenly face intense new institutional pressures.
Like quotas.
Yes, They aren't just doctors anymore, they are revenue generators. They report being pressured by corporate management to increase the average transaction value, which means finding ways to add more tests, more blood work, more premium products to every single visit. They're closely monitored on how many clients they cycle through per shift.
And this creates a severe, often unbearable ethical tension for the veterinarians, contributing to massive burnout rates in the profession.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to the scenario of the veterinary oncologist offering a $15,000 cancer treatment versus offering simple palliative end-of-life care to keep the dog comfortable.
It's a huge moral dilemma.
The owner is being asked to make a complex medical decision for a biological being that cannot speak, cannot consent, and cannot understand what chemotherapy is. The owner is making this decision under conditions of extreme grief while navigating a medical system that is increasingly designed and optimized by capital to extract the maximum possible revenue from that exact moment of vulnerability.
It risks turning the pure love for the animal into an aggressively commodified leverage transaction.
It makes you question every recommendation when you walk into the clinic. Is this MRI actually necessary for the dog's well-being, or is it being strongly suggested to help the clinic meet its quarterly revenue targets mandated by a holding company in New York?
Correct.
It is a fascinating, disturbing collision of advanced medical technology, rapacious capital, and deep human love. And that collision leads us right into the final questions of our discussion today. What does the future of this companionship economy look like, and how do we grapple with the ethics of our care?
Well, the demographics alone guarantee that this market is not going to shrink. It is going to keep evolving and expanding.
Why is that?
You have aging baby boomers and Gen Xers who are fiercely attached to their pets, which is creating a massive, surging demand for specialized geriatric pet care, canine physical therapy, and complex end-of-life medical services.
And what about the younger generations?
Simultaneously, you have millennials and Gen Z entering their peak earning years. These generations have significantly lower marriage rates and higher rates of delayed parenthood compared to previous generations.
So they treat the pets like kids.
Exactly. They view their pets as primary family members. They have both the financial capacity and the emotional orientation to sustain and likely increase this elevated premium spending.
We are also seeing the rapid integration of artificial intelligence into this space. It's not just basic webcams at daycares anymore. Artificial intelligence is being deployed to monitor a dog's micro-movements via cameras to detect early signs of arthritis or illness.
Wow.
There are AI algorithms designing hyper-personalized diets based on a dog's genetic swab and daily activity levels. And most wildly, there are speculative, heavily funded tech startups attempting to use AI machine learning to translate animal vocalizations.
I actually talked to them.
Yes, people are so desperate, so hungry for access to their animals' inner emotional lives that they are literally hoping algorithms can finally break the interspecies barrier and let them talk to their dog.
But alongside this push into high-tech algorithmic futures, we are simultaneously seeing a profound return to those Victorian-era morning rituals we discussed at the very beginning. The data shows explosive growth in the pet aftercare and memorialization industry.
Yes, it's the return of the pet cemetery, but vastly modernized. We are talking about the rising popularity of aquamation, which is alkaline hydrolysis, marketed as a greener, gentler alternative to traditional fire cremation.
I've heard of that.
There are mobile cremation units that will come directly to your house to handle the remains privately. And there is a booming field of professionalized grief counseling, specifically tailored for pet loss.
What is truly profound about the growth of this aftercare industry is that it shows society is finally willing to legitimize the grief of losing an animal.
It used to be so taboo.
Think about a generation ago. If your family dog died on a Tuesday, you were largely expected to just get over it, maybe bury it in the backyard, and show up to work on Wednesday morning with a stiff upper lip.
You couldn't really call in sick for a dog.
No. If you cried too much, people thought you were overly sentimental or unstable. Now, society is finally recognizing that losing a primary attachment figure, even if that figure is a non-human animal, causes real, devastating, neurologically identical grief that deserves public space, dignity, and support.
I think that is a beautiful evolution in human empathy. But we can't end on a purely triumphant note, because the reality of this economy forces us to ask a really difficult, uncomfortable moral question. Through all of this spending, all of this humanization, are we actually serving our pets, or are we ultimately just serving our own emotional needs?
This is the crux of the ethical debate. This is where the relentless humanization of pets clashes violently with true, objective animal welfare.
Let's look again at the brachycephalic dogs, the French bulldogs, the pugs, the Boston Terriers. The French bulldog is currently the most popular dog breed in America. Why?
Because they look like babies.
Yes. Because they are incredibly popular on Instagram, and because humans are neurologically, evolutionarily hardwired to find baby-like features adorable. Big, wide-set eyes, flat faces, round heads. It triggers our caregiving instinct.
But at what cost?
Exactly. Breeding for those specific extreme aesthetics means these dogs suffer from chronic, lifelong respiratory distress. A standard French bulldog often literally cannot breathe normally, cannot cool itself down through panting on a warm day, and cannot reproduce without human surgical intervention.
The moral paradox here is glaring and deeply uncomfortable. We express our immense love for these animals by spending thousands upon thousands of dollars on specialized surgeries.
Like widening their nostrils or shortening their soft palates.
Exactly, merely to manage the biological suffering that our own aesthetic preferences designed into their bodies in the first place. If we truly deeply believed in the ethical claims of our modern pet parent discourse, if we truly viewed them as equals deserving of bodily autonomy and health, true moral progress would demand that we confront and stop these specific breeding practices entirely.
We would prioritize their ability to breathe over our desire to look at a cute, flat face.
Exactly.
It is a devastating critique of our entire system. We humanize them in the exact ways that make us feel good, buying them birthday cakes, matching sweaters, putting them in strollers, projecting our own anxieties onto them. But we completely ignore their actual biological welfare when it conflicts with what we think looks cute or serves our emotional needs.
We love them, but we love them selfishly.
So if we synthesize all of this, the history, the dog parks, the private equity buyouts, the genetics, the profound grief, we return to the $147 billion question. What does this astronomical number actually mean?
It is undeniably a ledger of deep, genuine human love. But it is also a measure of profound structural loneliness.
Right.
It is a testament to an era of unprecedented material abundance. And ultimately, it is a map of how a wealthy modern society organizes its emotional life and buys comfort when traditional avenues of community and connection begin to fray.
It is an incredible, complex mirror held up to who we are right now. Now, before we wrap up today's incredibly deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought that builds on everything we've just unpacked together.
Let's hear it.
We mentioned earlier that tech researchers are currently dogs' barks, whines, and body language over the next decade.
Right.
If they actually succeed, what happens if the AI translates our dog's inner monologue and the dog tells us they aren't actually enjoying the organic, human-grade birthday cakes?
Oh, that would be interesting.
What if they hate the specialized designer strollers, the matching sweaters, and the agonizing $15,000 limb-sparing surgeries? What if, after all this commodification, all this financial panic, and all this crushing guilt, the dog just tells us they want us to put our glowing rectangle phones down, open the back door, and take them for a long walk in the dirty woods? What happens to the $147 billion companionship economy then? Just something for you to mull over the next time you are standing in the pet store aisle.
It would certainly disrupt the entire business model of the industry.
Absolutely, it would collapse overnight. Well, this has been an incredibly enlightening and challenging journey today, and we must emphasize to you, our listener, that this entire wide-ranging conversation is derived directly from the second book of the 30-volume series, To Preserve, Protect, and Defend the Soul of America.
Right. Specifically, we've been exclusively exploring the text from Volume 2, Fentanyl Nation, Inside America's Opioid Catastrophe.
Yes, authored by Sue B. Howell.
And what is truly fascinating conceptually is that a book fundamentally focused on America's opioid catastrophe contains this brilliant metaphorical chapter on the pet economy.
It is. It serves as a profound reflection of our deep structural isolation. And, we want to make sure you know that this specific book, Volume 2, Fentanyl Nation, Inside America's Opioid Catastrophe, is now available in all Amazon bookstores across the world.
Definitely. We enthusiastically encourage you to go check out the book on Amazon, read it for yourselves, and please leave comments and feedback on the page.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today.
Thank you for listening.